so we're going to start up again. We have 2 talks in the next session, and we'll be back to a break. So Chris is going to talk about boards typed conversational interfaces.
Hello, I am Chris. I'm faculty at Northeastern, and this is some work that I did with my master's student, Manas Agrawal, who is sad to be unable to be here. I wanted him to give the talk, but he couldn't get away to come here, sadly. So what we are talking about is conversational interfaces, usually between some kind of thinking, sentient creature like a human or a cat, and some kind of computational agent in order to accomplish some kind of task. These sorts of things have been deployed to replace or augment traditional user interfaces, and often to replace or augment human labor for things like customer service. And the arguments for their use, usually in those contexts, but sort of more generally, at least the arguments for their use that kind of resonate with me, is that unlike a UI kind of giving you its own opinions about what you want to do and how to do it, it lets the users steer, kind of express what they want to do in their own terms. And it also permits this kind of mode of interaction where you're iteratively refining what exactly you want to do, trying to understand your options, and maybe don't know fully how to specify your query yet, and would like to submit that query in pieces, have that iteratively refined with this agent. However, these things have been known to have flaws, and I'm curious just to hear if anything comes to mind for you right away, where you're like, I don't know, I hate these things, or I've had problems with them. What are some things that come to mind for you? What are some flaws? Anyone got something that just comes to the top of your head? Sure.
Often they're like a wrapper over something that still has a limited set of options, and it's just a disguising the fact that that's limited.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anything else?
It's difficult to quickly survey a wide range of items or options.
Without these tools, you mean, or?
So for example, the chat you were showing, it's like there are 28 options. How do you want to filter them? And if I just
if you can just view them, there might be a better way to do that than to try to communicate in a back and forth kind of thing. Yeah, that makes sense. One last one. Yeah.
It sometimes will ask a question about what I want to do next, and that's not what I want to do next, and then I have to have the moment of, is that what I want to do next?
Yeah.
And then I realize, no, that's not.
It tries to force you into some kind of workflow that's not, that's in conflict with what you want to do. Yeah. Cool. So I think for this work, we really want to try to disentangle 2 concepts, and not necessarily saying one of these is a thing we want to keep and one we want to throw out, but to distinguish 2 different problems that tend to be entangled when people are thinking about these tools. One of them is the idea of natural language input as a way of telling a computer what you want to do, and then the other is dialogic interaction, this alternation kind of between human and machine to try to kind of build up a shared context. And there are authoring tools for these sorts of things. One that Anas and I looked at a lot was called Dialogflow. This is Google's tool, and they kind of help you make this separation a little bit. They have an interface where you can put in training phrases, and then those will kind of associate the natural language sentences to these more abstract things called intents that get mapped onto a symbolic representation. And this idea isn't new. In fact, it was kind of a central part of the original way people conceptualized AI or agent sort of systems in the kind of in the old days. So this is Terry Winograd's diagram from Terry Winograd's dissertation on this kind of famous, maybe not even as famous as it should be, project called Sherdlu, a much better than ELIZA kind of dialogue system that also had this underlying world model and really emphasized the use of representation structures and reasoning as kind of a separate loop from the natural language understanding part. And so when you think about it primarily through the lens of natural language understanding and the flaw kind of as being it doesn't understand what I say, then it's easy to see this as an AI problem, and a lot of people tackle it from that perspective, and then they're like, we just need better NLU, we need LLMs and things like that. But if we instead kind of think about well, maybe we want to do a better job of having representation structures we can surface and think about this, problem of mapping user intent onto like a scoped set of supported operations, then it looks a lot more like a PL problem. So the main idea of our paper is like, can we use ideas from type systems for conversational interface authoring? The contributions of the paper are largely kind of trying to articulate some of the problems here and sketching ideas for ways that type systems can help us make sense of this. It's very work in progress. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we came up with. So talking about the basic idea of how we're using types to inform this, the kind of application of two different adages in type systems, making invalid states unrepresentable and well-typed expressions don't go wrong, and then talk to you a little bit about how we envision this maybe as a possibilities for future work. So I want to start with kind of some examples of the sorts of things that we're thinking of through this lens of ill-typed or well-typed dialogues. So this first example of an ill-typed dialogue is supposing that we're trying to do a flight purchasing kind of interaction. I ask which flights go to Pittsburgh tomorrow, where are you departing from, and then I give the answer, I want to fly on JetBlue. And it says, okay, I didn't understand that because it wasn't a proper response to the kind of question that was being asked. And so I would sort of, from this perspective, diagnose this as like the user was able to enter something that wasn't really a response to the question that was being asked of them. You might diagnose this a different way, but this is sort of one framing of the problem. My second example is I say which flights go from Boston to Pittsburgh tomorrow. It gives me two examples. And then I ask, what time does the JetBlue flight depart? And it goes back to, like, where are you departing from? And the kind of place where this can come up is, well, I could see this as a sort of lost context. Like, I was trying to refer back to something that was introduced into the conversational context, and it didn't, kind of keep track of that information. And these are both, like, very similar to real problems that I have encountered with setting things up in dialogue flow. Manas and I were kind of trying to come up with some concrete examples of things that in this kind of existing authoring tool, you would encounter these sorts of problems. So adapting these adages from type systems, we're thinking about making invalid states representable, applying that through giving the user a more constrained kind of input mode, where they can actually discover and like iteratively discover the scope and possibility space of well-formed expressions or queries or operations. And the well-typed expressions don't go wrong part is basically every utterance the user can construct should be meaningful in some way in the conversational context. So we developed this notion of a type-safe dialogue. And it starts with kind of user-definable types, where by user here I actually mean the bot author, specifying a domain of meaningful expressions. And then the meta-language type system provides this notion of well-typed queries in addition to like well-typed partial queries that can be iterated on. Okay. So, we've seen this adage, like, CI is the new UI, and you might ask, well, what was wrong with UI, right? Okay, well, we still have it. We can certainly, still like, purchase flights with standard user interfaces. And I want to start by saying I think types have something cool to say about even this idea. So instead of just permitting, of course, like free-form natural language input, we can have user interface widgets. This is kind of the like, maybe dual to input validation, right? The idea of only giving people exactly those inputs that are going to be well formed and well understood by the system. So I've long thought it would be kind of fun and interesting and maybe useful to have a direct relationship between like type system and the user interface. So if we kind of think of like a city as a big disjunction, some type of different possible cities, and similarly with airlines, then we can specify a flight as an origin city, a destination city, a departure date, and like an optional return date. And then we can imagine sort of synthesizing a UI in a kind of uniform way based on, interpreting some types as something like radio buttons or drop-down menus and product types as simultaneous options in a panel, something like that. Right? But of course, we're interested in the scope of this work in turning this kind of thing into something more conversational, going back to these goals of allowing the user to steer, allowing some partial input, and guiding them towards something, towards a meaningful and discoverable mental model of those queries and operations. Okay, so if we want to try to ask this question through a more structured kind of interface, you can start with the natural language sentence and the idea that, okay, well, natural language itself does have structure. We have tools for understanding like parts of speech and how sentences fit together. And so a query is something interrogative. We can kind of map this in the like logical semantics of natural language way to something like an existential, or in the logic programming way. Right? You can kind of think of like, I'm doing a query, or a database query, or a logic program query, which is going to be represented by some kind of existential proposition. This has a domain, which is like flights. We refer to these as entity sorts that are authored by the bot author. And then we have some kind of like predicate or constraint, maybe, that can specify, well, I'm interested in flights in particular who have certain origins and destinations. And maybe there is some kind of like heuristic or minimization that takes place over this. So, okay, all we're doing is kind of like acknowledging that the user can't just type anything like happy birthday or whatever and have this be a meaningful interaction. They are like asking a question, and questions have structure to them, right? So we can think of this as being specified by some kind of typing rule, and we're like proposing this meta language that can help us kind of make sense of this with this typing rule that basically allows us to have these typed which queries. And imagining this is like there's a set of queries for every domain sort. Okay, so this is going to perhaps get us a way to structure what the kinds of things the user can say. And now we want to think about this problem of like managing the shared context in this interaction. So if we think of this as being mapped to this more formal kind of which expression, then we can think of this as updating the conversational state to, we have a partial query, we have some kind of query in progress, we know some information about what the user has, some kind of constraint, but there's still an under constraint in terms of the answer we may eventually want to give. And so this tells us like there's a missing piece, and it needs to be a city. And when we ask for a city, we can kind of carefully specify like how the user can tell us this information that's specific to what we need to know. So in the paper we have a sketch of a type system for doing this like maintaining of shared context and tracking conversational state with this little dialogue language kind of thing. And trying to get the type system kind of gives a way of telling us when a kind of global dialogue is well formed. We're trying to develop some reasonable notion of type safety. I feel like we don't quite have the statement of it right, but something like every well-typed dialogue action should take us into a good state, either conclude the conversation or advance it into a state that supports a non-empty set of well-typed responses on both the bot and the human side. Okay, so a roadmap of future work. Started at 1:25. Yeah, that was 1 minute. Oh, okay, perfect, great. So we are, so I think that there's probably a lot of relationships with the sort of like formal system that we've been playing around with to other kind of formalisms for interaction, things like session types. And I think like we could do an implementation of this in a independently typed language and play around with case studies, and that would be fun. But I'm actually also, like, mainly for this project, I'm more interested at the moment in doing like UI prototyping and more actual functional prototypes. I like logic programming a lot. I've got some logic programming systems I'm actively building and doing integration with some of those, or other compatible like approaches to databases could be interesting. And yeah, maybe there's still an argument we want natural language as an input form some of the time, and maybe we want to map natural language utterances into the formal representation. And then in terms of experiments, I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of evaluating existing CI authoring tools in terms of like where they get things wrong that PL might be able to help with this. And we'd want to do some kind of comparative case studies and user studies as well. To do all this, I need some money. So, yeah, I'm interested in applications outside of like corporate stuff. I know I'm over time. Yeah, talk to me about any of these things if you're interested in them. And this is my kind of summary of the goals and challenges that we've explored. But I'm very interested in what you think we've missed and where the best opportunities are for kind of PL style thinking in this problem space. Thanks.
All right, we're.
I guess I'm calling it. Yes. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I was struck by, so I like making sure the system is well typed. I'm not sure about making sure the user is well typed.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I feel like typing often has like kind of a strict model, right, which is good for programming languages. But I probably want users to be able to break out of kind of a fixed template and kind of take the conversation in their own direction.
Yeah.
And so how do you like reconcile these?
Right. Yeah. I was, thinking back to like Harry's comment too about like sometimes this like workflow that the bot wants to shepherd you through, or the kind of like phone tree script model is not exactly what you want. I still think that there's a role for types in terms of guiding the user to what things they can say that are meaningful, as in maybe it's not just you have to give me a direct answer to what I said, but like here's a kind of structure editing style like set of possible utterances you could say right now, and some of them might be queries, some of them might be even like switching topics and saying something else, but there's still like a structure to maybe adhere to. That's my thought. Yeah.
This is more of a video game than a question. But Curse of the Golden Idol ? Is there any like inspiration you draw from there, or like flaws in how it supplies choices to the user?
Yeah. I mean, I take a lot of inspiration from these kind of like a lot of like experimental interactive fiction. It's like the interactive fiction was kind of born through this unstructured parser experience, and then there were like structured. There are structured expressions that determine what is actually valid in those contexts, and so in a lot of other interactive fiction systems. Those of you who don't know what Curse of the Golden Idol is, it's a game where you are like trying to figure out what happened in a scenario, and you're given an interface with it's like a story with pieces missing, and you fill in the names of people and the locations and the items and everything to kind of like confirm that you know what's going on. But it's like very Mad Lib style, kind of similar to the way that I think sometimes about structure editing, like type structure editing, and block-based programming and all these things. And I don't know, it's a big soup of related ideas. I guess.
So the question is like, is that kind of the direction you're going in, or is it like deeply flawed in some way that I'm not seeing? I don't know. Anything bad about it? It's interesting.
I think there needs to be more experimentation in terms of actual UI. I think there's like a lot of possibilities there, and it's not clear we have exactly the right thing. Drag and drop, for example, is not my favorite. I think like Hazel does some pretty nice things in that space. Yeah. I'll go with this.
Yeah, this is more of a comment. So I think this can be really useful in settings where the like agent system interfaces with existing APIs.
Yeah.
So I think like if you think about like JavaScript with like loose type system, so the user may like enjoy the looseness of the conversation tone, but when it's time for the agent to like submit the form to like those kind of rigid APIs, so this can like sort of serve as a like validation library, like
Right.
validation sort of tasks.
Yeah.
I think it can be useful.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Sure. Thank you.
I don't know if this is a super useful connection, but something that struck me was it seems like you're almost trying to like encode like what linguists think about pragmatics into like sort of a type system regime.
Yes.
Like a lot of your
Thank you
things
for
like
picking up on this. Yes.
aligns really well with like Ricean maxims and sort of like what Jonathan said is sort of like, oh, like maybe like sometimes you should be able to violate like Ricean maxims, like you should be able to not be relevant.
Right.
And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think the connection to linguistic pragmatics is huge. I did a lot of thinking about that in some projects earlier in my career, and yeah, like I have been framing this in terms of like utterances and the kind of way that some like earlier all of the references for this are escaping me, but certainly things like Paul Grice, that Paul Grice worked on in terms of pragmatics of conversation inform this, because you want to be able to refer to things that are relevant, and I don't know. You don't know if you actually want to break Gricean maxims in a conversation with a chatbot, but that's an interesting question.
Okay, thanks, Chris.